Hey Dave, I made a mage, as you know, we were chatting about it, and been playing around with them a little bit, and I'm like pretty happy with them. Um, I think I figured out like a lot of stuff about magery, and I know it's super confusing in this game. They don't give you that much, so I figured I'd actually make a video just kind of going over what I did because I think it'll be helpful, even for the build that you chose. So jump right into it. Um, so the first thing was uh, obviously learning what spells are out there, right? Because they don't really tell you. When you're talking to some people, they'll say you need to experiment, like the Watchers at Conflux or the Rune Sage in Berg. They're like give you some basic stuff, but they all say you need to like experiment. So to save time, I wasn't going to do that. Um, so these are all here. These are the three sigils in the game and the combinations of what they do. So, like looking at it, fireball, right? That's arranged for fire. Immolate is just a buff, and then you could light the sigil on fire. So that's like a close range. The ice has some ranged attacks, and it also has some like this explosion is close range, and this force kick is close range, but then the projectile is pretty long range. So it has two close range things and a two short range and one long range. Um, and then wind is obviously I think you have that one. Basically, you get two close range blasts with this. This lightning bullet, sigil wind fire reload, that actually requires like a gun, and when you fire reload on the sigil of wind, it just turns into this lightning damage. So that would take more action slots because obviously you need to have a gun equipped, and I mean I'll go into this later, but I went with runes, so I needed a lexicon in my offhand, so I didn't want to mess with having to change items because that just eats up action slots. So um, all that being said, uh, it doesn't really say it here, but these things have cooldowns and cast times. So depending on what build you want to go with, the like Spark, that's a 3-second cooldown, and it doesn't consume the sigil. So every 3 seconds you could cast a fireball. So I thought, um, that would be a good long range skill to have. Um, Also, the sigil of fire doesn't require a breakthrough point, which goes into skills. So I'll talk about that later. Sigil of ice does require uh, a breakthrough point. Um, I mean, ultimately, I'm sure there's a lot of builds. I'm just going to kind of go over, what I did to give you some ideas. So I went with the Sigil of Fire and Sigil of Wind. I mean, as you know, Sigil of Wind's a free cast, so it's pretty useful. And this Conjure on the Sigil of Wind, I don't know if you've used it. It does the most damage, 150, 200 impact, huge. But the problem with it is the casting time, not the cooldown, but the time itself. Usually, whenever I try to do that in battle, uh, I'll get hit, or if I'm fighting multiple enemies, I'll even get knocked down. And sometimes I'm not sure how it calculates, but I would say more than half the times it gets interrupted, and I don't actually do the damage, and now I'm like hurting or knocked down, and I get more damage. So I never actually use this. The only thing I use on the Sigil of Wind is in fact the Spark. Again, 3-second cooldown, and it's a close range lightning explosion at 70. It also keeps my action bar pretty light. Um, so the Spark is my go-to for the Sigil of Wind, and it also doubles as the Fireball Spark. Again, so just, action bar management. So with the Spark, I could do a close range and a long range fire. A long range fireball. So the other part is runes. So I found this handy chart that goes over um, all the rune combinations and what they do. Uh, Depending on your build, you know, these might be useful. Like something I really thought you would like is the Runic Blade and the Great Runic Blade, I mean, look at the damage on these, and it's magic damage. I mean, this is the one-hander, and this is the two-hander, right? This is 28 damage. I mean, even your mace, was it the Mace of Ice, whatever it was, it's only 20 frost, right? So if you start boosting that with frost damage, the base is only 20, where this starts at a base of 28, and depending on what skills you go with, this down here is the boost for that. So it's one of the right, the runic prefix. All runic spells are more powerful and have added effects. So that's what this is. If you go with that skill in the rune sage. Now the runic prefix and the internal lexicon are mutually exclusive right here. So you can't actually get both. So if you want to cast runes, right, from the rune sage, you either have a lexicon in your offhand, or, right, you take this this internal lexicon over the runic prefix, which would enable you to cast runes if you're like having a staff. Now, I thought the runic spells being more powerful and having the added effects was certainly worth carrying the lexicon, especially because I looked at some of the items in the game, and I really wasn't terribly attached to any two-handed weapons. So that's what I decided to do. But like, again, if you take your one hand, even if you want to do the shield, because that's your build, your base is still 28, and if you do like the mist boon, that boosts ethereal damage, just like the cool boon, boosts ice damage. And I'm sure there's other gear in the game, yeah, I've seen some that boost ethereal damage. Not to mention that if you, go with the runic prefix and you get this bonus, you gain the Divine Light Imbue on this blade, which is 25% base damage. So this 28, you'd have to add a quarter to it, which is like 6. So now you're at 34 base, or we at 34 damage, ethereal. Plus it adds 6 lightning damage. Now that's not to your spells. I actually looked this up. That 6 lightning damage is to the weapon. So you'd be doing the 34 plus 6 lightning. So total magic damage would be 40, and a big chunk of it is ethereal. So again, if you buff ethereal, you could do a lot. I don't use this stuff because I'm not really like a fighter. I went like pure caster, so I'm not using these things. But I wanted to talk about that at least because that's a good. I think that'd be good for you. I mean, heal, self-explanatory, right? Again, if you get the bonus, recovers 2 health per second for 10 seconds. I personally liked it. I didn't. If you're going with a shield, you probably don't care too much about that, right? If you're going to cast runes, maybe you want the prefix. But I thought this was pretty handy even for your build. There's the protection, which is big. Look at this, +2 defense, +15 impact resistance. That's pretty huge. And if you have the bonus, it's another +1 to defense. I mean, that's like wearing plate right there. Plus, you get more impact resistance and all these elemental resistances. So I thought that was pretty good. Runic Lantern just takes away the ability. You don't have to carry a lantern anymore. That's some weight management. Adds some time. This bonus. And then this trap. This trap is one of my damage go-tos, so it is a trap, so it needs to be triggered by someone to walk on it. But with the bonus, it does 70 ethereal, 30 decay. That's 100 damage total. That's huge. Also, these advanced combinations, you'll see here there's like this little thingy. I don't know if you know too much about runes, but I'll just talk a little bit about it. So in order to cast Runic Heal, you need to have Runic Protection on you. Right? So you've already casted Runic Protection, you're running around with it, you need to heal, then you cast the Egoth Des, and you'll cast Heal. So it says here instantly restores 40 health, consumes Runic Protection. So the Runic Protection goes away and you heal. So if you literally just want to cast Heal, you have to cast Des Egoth and then Egoth Des, right? And all these kind of work that way. To cast the Great Runic Blade, you need to have the Runic Blade out, so it's those 4. Runic Lantern, right? Huge duration, which is good. It's convenient. And the lightning, you need to have the lantern on. However, casting the lightning doesn't consume the lantern, which again is huge because casting these 2 runes will deal 55 damage, 65 if you go with the prefix, which I did. So I have the advanced damage. Um, and there's no sigil required, right? This is just pure mana casting, and it's unlimited. Um, because you don't need to have like a Firestone or an Ice Stone. You can cast it kind of anywhere. So if you're on the run, you sprint away, cast lightning, sprint away, cast lightning. So I thought being, Rune Mage was be good for that because you're not bound to that sigil. Um, and that is pretty much it. I mean, the traps kind of, that's basically just like a close range AoE. So that's just like the spark on the wind sigil or even the ice blast on the ice sigil. But again, I didn't decide to go with the ice sigil. So having said all that, I was putzing around with, obviously I needed to build the mage, right? So before I even made the character, I was looking at skills, and these are the three I went with. And I'll just talk a little bit about it. I know this video is going to be long, but yeah, I think it'll be worth it. So the first one's Cabal Hermit. That's probably the one that, you'll get first anyway. I did this really, really, if you think about it. This uh, Shamanic Resonance is incredible, right? It buffs all your boons um, by 10. So if you actually look at the boons, which I don't have a page open, so we can't, but if you do, they add damage as well. And I think it's 20% damage, which then turns into 30%. So again, because that action bar is so small, my strategy was I want to be able to cast the same few spells, right, very often. So I need short cooldowns, and I need to have access to just very few spells. I don't need a lot. That's why I didn't decide to get the Ice Sigil. I went with the Fire and the Wind. Um, but to be effective in that, right, the spells have to do a lot of damage because I'm only casting a few. So they got to be, in my mind, they had to be hard hitters because I don't have that versatility that like another build would have. So I needed to go. I needed to go with this, and of course, I mean it makes sense because the Sigil of Wind is beyond that breakthrough point. So that was that. So the Rune Sage, that's obvious. You need to get runes. Um, if you're going to bother with runes, I mean, obviously, right, this breakthrough point is huge for any caster. Increase max mana by 40. When I started looking at these breakthrough points, at Conflux Mountain, you have to sacrifice health and stamina just to get mana. So I didn't want to do that too much because I didn't want to get too squishy. So I was like, well, if I go with runes, I can get this increased max mana by 40, right? And now I only put 1 point into the mana, which unlocks it. And then I use this breakthrough, and that would put me at 60 mana. And that's just raw, that's no buffs. I was like, well, that's pretty good. And runes obviously seemed, like a good choice. But because I'm not going to have a lot of mana, I figured I would need to have a bit of mana regen all the time, which you could do with food and potions and stuff, but that's kind of a headache. Um, but I figured I would also, need to have a bit of mana cost reduction, which we talked about. But I didn't even really know about that. I mean, playing your game, you told me you got like the Jade Lich set and like the light set. So I looked up some equipment and I saw the cost reductions that they have, and they're pretty easy sets to get. Like we already did that, so I wasn't like ruining anything in the game. This whole build actually doesn't require you to go to the desert, so I haven't like ruined anything for myself. Um, Maybe it could have been better. I don't know, but anyway, so the 40 mana, brings you to 60 mana reduction. You can kind of see the build coming together, right? Um, this is obvious. This lets you cast all of the advanced runes. So like the heal, right? You need to have this. And then this is the decision down here. Do you want to carry the lexicon or you don't? I went to carry it, so my guy's going to carry it again because I wasn't really tied to any two-handed weapons, whatever, and I wanted to have those more powerful effects. So I was like, it's a small price to pay because I was going for, lots of buffs and making the few spells that I cast powerful. So my last one, which I already kind of talked about, was the mana regen. Pretty huge, at least because I just don't want to have to worry about food And this would stack with food as well. And I was concerned. I only put 1 point to mana. Didn't want to run out of mana. It's my life force, right? That's how you do all your damage. So, and obviously, Sigil of Fire is free, so you take that. But, so, I decided to go with this mana regen. And also, down here, the decision, Sigil of Ice or Fire Affinity. Now, I could have took the Sigil of Ice. Again, there's not enough action slots for my build in my bar, but so it didn't really make sense anyway. And like I was saying before, my whole concept was to take skills that have short cooldowns, quick casts, and then those typical spells, if you look at this overall, don't do a lot of damage. So I went with that strategy, but then boosting it with all these other methods. So like this Fire Affinity, in my mind, I had to take it. So Sigil of Ice just got pushed to the curb. This is pretty huge. It increases your defense and your fire damage by 15%. So this is probably the weakest point that I spent, but I still think it was good for basically the only reason why I went with this guy was for the mana regen and the Fire Affinity, those two things. But it's like a little added bonus that makes playing the character not as cumbersome. And again, that spark on the Fire Sigil is just huge, like a fireball machine gun. So that's the skills. Those are, the sigils. Really everything I wanted to show you online. Now if I bust out into the game, of course I'm paused right outside the bandit camp. I figure, I'd do a little demonstration of, what this guy could do and really talk about my hotbar a little bit. I actually just kind of did this, so I'm not terribly familiar. I have to look at the push again. Where's the... Oh, Mana Ward. Okay, that's the Immolate. Okay, so yeah, so I just forgot what the Mana Ward was for, because that's in my action bar. It boosts my fire damage by another 30%, and I receive some fire damage. Okay, forgive me, because I'm not terribly familiar with playing this guy, and it is kind of confusing. So I'm not going to unpause it because there's like bandits around, but if you look at the action bar down at the bottom here, you got the Spark, Sigil of Wind, Sigil of Fire. These are all the 4 runes, and then Mana Ward. So just like to recap, the Spark works on the Wind Sigil and the Fire Sigil, right? Wind creates the short range AoE blast. Spark on the Fire Sigil creates that fireball. So that'll be a go-to, right? Those two things. Again, the Spark on the Wind Sigil, right? It's quick, doesn't do a lot of damage, but it's a quick cast, and it's a quick like refresh time on the Spark, right? It's only 3 seconds. If you do the Conjure, on the Sigil of Wind, you'll do like twice the damage, but again, you just get knocked down, so it didn't make the cut, didn't make the action bar. Push on the Fire Sigil, again, just boost the shit out of your fire damage, another 30%. And then obviously there's the Spark on the Fire Sigil, which does the fireball. Going back to our runes, just before we go into this, I'll be casting Runic Lightning a lot, right? That's the free cast, no bound to a sigil. For me, it'll do 65 lightning damage, and it's free. Okay, you'll see, Runic Protection. I'll try to call out things as I'm doing it, so you know what's going on. Also, this trap, huge, 100 damage again. So that's some of the stuff I'll be doing as I hopefully obliterate this camp. Now the first thing I have to do, of course, it's cold, right? You can see my temperature's going down, and of course I have a cold, so 15% stamina regen, that's fun. Actually, there's before any fight you got a buff, so I'm gonna cast my boons. Only really need to cast 3. That'll boost all 3 skills, all 3 magic schools that I employ. So let's get at it. Let's tear some bitches up. Yeah, come get me. Not even gonna hit him. Be an idiot. Come on. Come to my sigil. So you can see, I mean, I like almost killed him. He's like on fire. So, okay, so he's dead, right? I mean, the fireball does a lot with all these buffs, and I didn't even emulate, which would have added another 30. Yeah, the sigils suck. They do require a bit. I'm going to cast a little bit of protection. That'll buff my defenses. I should have did that before. Also going to cast the lantern, so I could do my my lightning strikes. One hit wonder. Don't even remember how to cast lightning strike. I think it was 4-3. Where are all the fun people at? I hear them. Cast the 4. Alright, that was my fire. Ow. It's a quick cast, and it's effective as shit. I have my protection up, so... Oh, this guy's coming. I find that sigil. I'm getting kind of low, kind of need a heal. I know my, what's my heal? What is it? It's 2. 1. Again, it's nice having the 2 sigils because you could run back and forth to him, right? Like, that was the boss, and, you know, he did. Cast and heal. All through this, I mean, you know, keep it, like, look at my mana, right? It's, like, not going down between the mana reduction gear and that ley line connection. It's not a problem. See if my fire sigil is still up. It's not. Let's see, I got my lantern still, so I can cast a bolt on this guy. These guys are typically shittier. They're not really that good. Right, bolt, free cast, no sigil. Just gotta have the lantern out. You know, obviously I'm buffed, so there's lots of factors to consider, but... Open ass taking names. My boons are off. Recasted protection. Obviously the boons I just do